Hello, and welcome to the second episode of the All About Aristotle podcast. It would hardly surprise a modern listener to hear that the culture in which Aristotle was born and raised in was an immensely foreign and relatively unrecognizable one. Slavery was commonplace, women were generally confined to the private sphere, and there's essentially no economic mobility. The topics which will be covered in the next few episodes will definitely be offensive to modern sensibilities. One must keep in mind, however, that presentism is hardly a useful mindset. The grim realities shouldn't be sugar-coated, and we shouldn't expect people of the past to live up to contemporary social expectations. To begin with, we shall discuss the general history of the Greek people until the time of Aristotle, and in this episode, the history of the Hellenic peoples until the Greek Dark Age. Let's start at the very beginning, the first human inhabitants of the region. Humans have existed in Europe for millions of years, arriving to the region during the Stone Age. There is archaeological evidence, however, that humans didn't make their way to the islands in the Aegean Sea until about 200,000 years ago. This period of the human story is essentially lost to the waves of time, forming the bulk of prehistory. Slowly, around 20,000 years ago, humans began to form proto-communities. Finally, with the advent of agriculture, beginning from 7000 BC to 3200 BC, Greece entered the Neolithic era. The climate around this time began to stabilize, and humans began to form what can be described as cultures. Humans started taking up permanent residence, which was a drastic change from the hunter-gatherer nomadic lifestyle, which was the only viable method of survival prior to the advent of agriculture. Humans started taking up arts such as pottery, stock rearing, and exchanging raw materials. This was a massive innovation with unprecedented results to general economic activity. Society was cemented in stone. However, it would soon be cemented in a more sturdy metal. During the 3200s, Greece left the Stone Age and entered the Bronze Age. Of course, this tripartite division of human history into three ages, namely the Stone, Bronze, and Iron Ages, has garnered substantial criticism from anthropologists and historians, but is useful enough for this cursory tour through history. The spread of bronze weapons and materials likely began from Sumer, around 100 years before it made its way to the Greek peninsula. The spread of bronze weapons and materials likely began from Sumer, around 100 years before it made its way to the Greek peninsula. The technological advances were unprecedented, with devices such as the wheel and the ox plow being introduced, as well as one of the most groundbreaking inventions of human history, the written word. Greece slowly emerged as a regional power of the Mediterranean, with islands of the Cyclades taking center stage. Throughout the island, one can find a plethora of archaeological marvels, including female idols carved out of white marble centuries, which date all the way back to the late Neolithic era. One can also find an abundance of flat skillet pottery, nicknamed Cycladic frying pans. Soon after, on the island of Crete emerged the Minoan civilization. Whose expertise in maritime trade generated the Greeks their first notable economic hub within the Mediterranean Sea. Exporting to the Levant, Cyprus, and Greek mainland, the Minoans traded nearly exclusively in wine and olive oil, sometimes accompanied by timber, and imported various raw metals from neighboring civilizations. Although the Minoans were founded sometime during the late Neolithic age, it didn't become a regional power until sometime around the 2000 BC. An urbanized trading power, the Minoans became the first advanced civilization of Europe. The Minoans also inaugurated a staple which would be perfected by its near successor, palaces. Indeed, through art and trade, the Minoans were capable of dramatically influencing the cultural landscape of the far-off Egypt. The Minoans recorded their language with hieroglyphics and formed their own distinct language. However, sadly, all good things must come to an end. Although it is a mystery as to why the Minoans declined, it is known that the decline was slow. It began around 1500 BC and lasted all the way until 1100 BC. However, Greece wouldn't fall into a dark age just yet. Quickly, on the heels of the Minoans, emerged the Mycenaeans. The Mycenaeans were arguably the first advanced European civilization which existed within mainland Europe, rather than on one of the Mediterranean islands. The Mycenaeans were more warlike than their predecessor, and some historians speculate the Minoans may have fell due to Mycenaean invasions. During the Mycenaean era, the cities of Sparta, Athens, and Thebes flourished. Most Greek myths took place during this era, including the Trojan War, for instance. The world-famous epic of the For instance, the world-famous epic of Homer, the Iliad, depicts the Trojan War, with one of the main characters being the king of the Mycenaeans, Agamemnon. However, with the mysterious collapse of the Mycenaeans, Greece finally did fall into a dark age due to the event labeled the Bronze Age collapse. The details regarding this event are extremely unclear, and our podcast doesn't need to spend time delving into the various theories which attempt to answer the cause for what happened. However, in a single sentence, nearly all Bronze Age civilizations collapsed, including the Hittites and other civilizations such as the Assyrians, Egyptians, and the Mycenaeans were severely weakened. In our next episode, we will discuss Greek culture from the Dark Ages till the rise of Philip of Macedon, where we will leave off, and then we'll discuss the works and lives of the pre-Socratics, Socrates, and Plato, and then, finally, the life of Aristotle.